Okay. All right. Well, we'll kick it off. Do you think, Jess? You happy to?
Yeah.
A lot of people. Yeah. So if I just do the welcome, and then as people come in, Mary will let them in, and then you'll be able to take over and share your screen. Fabulous. All right. Welcome everywhere. Yuma. Oh, sorry, Jess. Yuma, and welcome everyone. Thanks again for registering to participate in our Future Drought Fund Farm Business Resilience webinar series. Today is on succession planning with Jess Cavanagh from Proactive. And Jess is the General Manager, so we're in very good hands. This is our fourth webinar in a series, and basically we've been focusing on promoting long-term resilience and sustainable productivity in farm businesses. So if you've missed any of our webinars, we've recorded them all, and we'll collate them onto a website at some point that you'll all be able to access. But if you've missed any and you want to have them a little earlier, just drop a line to myself and I'll be able to send those out to you. But for those who don't know me, I'm Jeni. I'm the ACT RALF, which is the Regional Agricultural Landcare Facilitator. I sit in the ACT Natural Resource Management team, which has a sustainable ag component, biodiversity and in Indigenous culture. So I'm very lucky to be able to work across all those streams, and of course, you know, work with fantastic experts like Jess and rural landowners in the ACT and New South Wales. So thanks again to the ACT, to the Australian Government, Future Drought Fund, Farm Business Resilient program, and the support of the ACT Government as well. Without that sort of funding, we wouldn't be able to hold these webinars and any sort of future face-to-face workshops that we, you know, have planned for the next 12 months. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm meeting on here in Canberra, which is the Ngunnawal people, and extend the acknowledgement to various traditional custodians of the land that hopefully you guys are all meeting on as well. And I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to our city and the region, and acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be attending today as well. So thanks again, everybody. So today's guest speaker, as I mentioned, is Jess. She's a fourth generation farmer, family farming business down near Harden, New South Wales, and she's very passionate about the evolution of modern agriculture and seeing that farming families are using best practice, ensuring longevity and sustainability of the industry. She's very well qualified. She's got a double degree in arts law, has spent 3 years as a solicitor, you know, almost 5 years experience in local government, in economic development, and then layer on top of all that, she also has a family of 5 with 3 little tackers. So very busy. We really appreciate your time today, Jess, and we hope that you will enjoy the webinar. So just to remind you all, just to help out with that bandwidth, and so Jess doesn't end up being a robot, if you could just make sure that your camera and your microphones are muted. And if you want to, there's a little on my screen, there's a little chat bubble on the top of my screen. That's the chat function. If you want to put any questions in there or anything that you want to acknowledge throughout the presentation, just pop them in there, and when we get to the end, we can have a look in the chat and see what's there. If you want to let us know, you know, where you're dialing in from. Last week we had someone down on the Mornington Peninsula, so that was very exciting. Let us know where you're coming in from, and any other questions, pop them in the chat there. We have started recording, so like I said, we'll record it and we'll send it out. But if you don't want to be seen on the video at all, don't touch your camera, keep it off. I think that's really about it for me. Jess, if you want to, you're the star of the show today. If you want to take over from here and tell us who you are, share your screen, and away you go.
Well, thank you so much, Jeni, for the introduction. Thank you all for having me.
You are a bit robot there.
Process is
yeah, you're just cutting in and out a little bit, Jess. See how we go.
Yeah, I can change my internet connection if it continues, Jeni, so just let me know, please.
Yeah, no worries, okay.
Everybody who's on the brink of engaging a succession process is in a situation where they're wondering why they're here and what they're doing. And for me, succession planning is just a part of good business practice. So I will talk more about that in my presentation, but I just urge you to consider this as what should be routine practice for every rural business owner, because it really does underwrite the future success of your business. Jeni gave a very good introduction of me. I've been in the general management role at Proactive for a year now. I've been with the business for 5 years, really love the work. I think it's very rewarding assisting families through what can be an absolute train wreck, but hopefully ends up being a very rewarding process. I will just share my screen. Can everybody see that, or anybody see that?
Yep,
Great,
can see it.
So this is really a succession 101, strategies to starting the conversation about succession. It is often a challenging thing to approach with families, and I think the main reason that it can be challenging is because families are naturally not embracing of conflict, which it does exist in every family, even when you don't think it is present. And from our perspective, working through conflict is the only way to resolve conflict rather than pretending it doesn't exist. So this is all about how we start the conversation to engage in a process. Succession is also about dynamics of managing generational change. Generationally, we're impacted by influencing factors that change our perspective broadly. So that's not just affected by the age and stage you're currently at, but also environmental factors. The purpose of facilitation in succession planning is to ensure that everybody from every part of the family, whether you're a son or a daughter or a mother or a father or an in-law to a family, to ensure that your perspective is fully shared, and that forms the basis of what are non-negotiables for a family, and therefore things that the family will actually implement when coming up with a succession plan. As I mentioned earlier, succession is part of running a business. So these are some of the that comprise successful business. So, you know, from training and development, strategic planning, communication, marketing, they're all part of things that you do every day in running your business, and succession should be one of them to ensure that your legacy is carried out generationally. When we talk about succession, we're talking about the transfer of, firstly, management, which is actually operational transition. So I think farmers are really good at what they do. I would comment that we're not necessarily good at running businesses, and that's usually because we're expected to take over a business without any kind of training in that. So firstly, we transfer management, which is really day-to-day operations. Leadership is the running of the business, and ownership usually comes last, and from my perspective should come last. That's usually ownership of business and ownership of land, and quite often ownership of land doesn't transition until at an estate level. I will talk more about that, but that's kind of the three strands of what's being transferred in a succession process. I think broadly, most people have heard of succession planning, but having a good understanding about what it really is and what it is not, and the technical factors that are present in a succession planning process are really challenging to get a handle on. And often when people call with an inquiry to our business about what do we actually do in a succession process, I can rattle off a million things that we do, but it's often not until they've completed their process that they get a really good handle on what we are actually trying to achieve in facilitation. That is because it's unlike anything you've ever done before. It is a process that requires quite a bit of heavy lifting from each family member, and it does require a level of vulnerability, both in understanding what's important to each individual in the process and having the confidence to share that with family, because nobody wants to hurt other family members' feelings. So succession is a process. It's not a moment in time. So you might walk out of the succession planning process and have a plan. The purpose of that plan is for it to be flexible and to adjust to what's happening within the family at any given time. So it's a process. It's about family, people, and relationships. It's about management, leadership, and ownership, as I mentioned earlier. It's about figuring out what is fair, and fair is not always equal. It is driven by family values, wants, and concerns. Succession is not an event. It is not one person's problem. It's not about minimising tax, although there obviously are certain strategies that can be employed to ensure you're paying as little tax as possible. But from our perspective, succession should not be driven by that factor. It should be driven by the needs and wants of the family. It's not about equality, and it's not driven by technical issues that are handled by accountants and lawyers. So from our perspective, understanding the perspective of everybody that should form the basis of your plan should then go to lawyers and accountants to be technically implemented rather than the other way around. When unaddressed in a process, so if you engage in a process that doesn't have a high level of communication or a focus on family harmony, the following problems can arise: disagreements, ineffective communication, a lack of clarity or direction. And I would say, particularly for the younger generation, when engaging in a succession process, from my perspective, what the younger generation wants is clarity or direction. They don't necessarily want transition tomorrow. They just want to know what the future looks like so that they can start making their own plans to ensure their security in the business. Polarised opinions, jealousies, no formalised planning process, misconceptions. I believe that's the number one cause for people not engaging in the succession process, because it's really easy to hypothesize about what somebody else thinks. Our process has been designed really to combat that, the existence of misconceptions by having everybody sharing what is truly important to them, and also uncontrolled spending practices. So the outcome of the above can present as a breakdown in communication, anxiety, stress build-up, impact on financial performance of the business. That's one that that probably people aren't hugely aware of. I've just recently worked with a family, or I'm in the process of working with a family that mum and dad are at an age where they would really like to retire, and they've lost that probably driver to do hard yards of physical work, which is completely understandable. Because of that, the financial performance of the business is suffering. So historically, they ran at a 12,000 DSE, and they've dropped back down to about 9,000, just because they don't want to physically work with animals that are, you know, big and strong and able to hurt and all those other factors. And it's also affected by the fact that they'd like to have the freedom to go away a little bit more. Again, completely under which is further on the need for a succession process for that family. More serious problems lead to hard feelings, lack of cooperation, fights, and even legal action, often costing thousands of dollars. I'd say hundreds of thousands of dollars generally if it's fighting over land worth, you know, significant amounts with recent land price hikes, and an impact on health and well-being. One thing I say is that operationally you can have differences in how you want to run a business, particularly generationally, as I touched on earlier. But that's not actually the thing that keeps people awake at night. It's going to bed thinking, I don't know what the future looks like for me, or is my son or daughter even really interested in being privy to this transition? That's what I think really niggles at people late at night. So the first step to succession from our perspective is having a look at oneself. If you can understand your own perspectives and motives, then you're able to put yourself in the shoes of others. But until such time as you can really reflect on your own motives, it's really difficult to engage in a process. As a business owner, it's really really important that people are able to understand the purpose of their business from a number of different perspectives. So financial, one of the questions we ask people in the initial, we'll ask every family member in the initial stages of a succession process is, what's the purpose of the business? And we'll get a variety of answers, but usually we'll hear things like to produce great merino sheep, or to produce the best Angus cattle we can possibly produce, or you know, a multitude of answers. Really, what business owners need to be able to do is to address all four parts of this dichotomy, so that the possibility of a holistic transition is possible. So, for example, financially, what's the purpose of the business? It's to derive an income year in, year out that can allow us to do the things we'd like to do, and it's to set us up financially so that we can retire in the way we would like to when the time is right for us. Personally, I would say broadly, farmers really love their jobs. That's what we hear, and one of the questions we ask is, why did you become a farmer? And most people we hear, well, there was really nothing else that I ever wanted to do. All I ever wanted to do was be a farmer. So we feel like farmers have that connection with what they're doing, which is why working with farmers is so rewarding. In production, that's usually where farmers answer first. So it's about having that great merino flock, or growing, you know, perfect pastures, or whatever it might be. And environmentally, touching on, you know, the need to be a custodian and to leave the land in a better position as what we took it on, so that it can be sustainable and longevity generationally. The difficulty in succession of a family business, particularly in agriculture, is that there are lots of different intersecting needs, and the thing that overlays all of those needs are the farmland itself. So we often say that if you can sit at a table with your family and have 3 different hats in front of you, one for your individual self, one for the family, one for the business, and then possibly even a 4th if you want to talk on perspective of the land. So, and making sure you're interchanging your hats so that people understand what perspective you're answering from. And I would say that's really prevalent when we work with families that have the next generation who have created their own families, and some that haven't yet. So for those that are still considering their family of origin, so the family they were born into, as their primary consideration, they'll answer quite differently to a child that has created their own family by marrying and having their own children. So the shift in perspective and how that means you form your value set is really important in understanding the perspective of an individual, so that we can bring those perspectives together to find a plan that is holistic and suits all family members. And I guess in saying that, what we try to ascertain in our process is what people just really can't live with. If they can't live with something, it's about really trying to find a solution that doesn't go there. So there is a lot of compromise and a lot of yielding when we're talking about the competing interests. So it's just about trying to find something that everybody can live with. Overlap of business's life cycle. Sorry, this slide tips back. So when we're talking about those overlapping and competing interests, we've got the 2 lines with parents, shouldn't say dad, it should say parents. Parents being the green line and the next generation being the purple line. And at business maturation, that's usually the time that transition is optimum. So you can see that green line sloping down past the point of maturation. So that's really where the family that I was describing earlier was at. So mum and dad are so ready to hang up their boots that they're, you know, significantly declining in production and energy. So they're just not, their hearts aren't in it anymore. That's the optimum time. But prior to that occurring, that's the optimum time for transition. So where the purple and the green lines intersect. And that really then the graph resets at that time. So because at the point of transition, when we're fully transitioned, those people in the next generation are learning how to do everything that mum and dad have already mastered, and or they're steering the ship in a slightly different direction. So then we're watching that growth and development stage into maturation and then hopefully transition again. Understanding the viability of your business is really important to allow opportunities both in transition and for creating some other opportunities, whether they be ensuring that you do have the kind of retirement that you would like and being able to financially assure your future, and creating opportunities for those both in and out of the business. I might just talk a little bit more about that. So when we have a family with numerous children, some who are wishing to carry on in the family business and others who've chosen a different path, and we have a lot of feelings around, particularly for parents, I think sometimes one of the hardest things before you engage in a succession process is how you can possibly be fair to children who are not choosing that life in the farming family business. And particularly with increasing land prices, even if you have significant off-farm assets, it's really tricky to be able to keep things equal. I would say in most cases it's impossible, and land prices have not lended themselves to doing that. So we do engage in quite a thorough exploration about what the land might be worth versus what it can actually produce, because I mean, I feel like a lot of the families, or most of the families we work with, the next generation incoming into the business have no intention to realise the value of the land. They just really want to use it to derive an income, which usually it is significantly less from a commiseration perspective in terms of what the value of the asset is versus the income it can derive. So we do spend a lot of time talking about how we can mitigate the discrepancy between values of, if we are to put it in a balance sheet. So creating early opportunities for children outside of the business can go a long way to mitigate that discrepancy. And that's something we spend a lot of time discovering what could be meaningful to assist those who won't be involved in the business in the future, so that you can create as many opportunities for those children as you can for those that you're handing over to. I spoke a little bit about generational differences, and this graph is from the work of Mark McCrindle, and really goes into talking about those leadership challenges and attributes generationally. So as you can see there, you've got your builders who are 73 plus, your boomers who are 55 to 73, Gen X 40 to 55, and Gen Y 25 to 40. And there may even be some younger than that, either in this chat or in this webinar, or your own children. So if we depict the boomers and Gen Y, because that's the real transition ages at this point in those generations. So a boomer's outlook on leadership is optimistic, and Gen Y's is hopeful. Work ethic is driven versus determined. View of authority for a boomer is love-hate, and for Gen Y is polite. Leadership by consensus, this is a big one. Consensus and pulling together are quite similar, and that's why I would say a lot of the time how the boomers lead versus Gen Y's is semi-similar, and that seems to be a relatively seamless part of transition, what we're finding. Relationships are personal gratification versus inclusion. Promotions, this is a big one. Boomers believe in tenure, whereas Gen Y believe it's their right. So it's like my husband turning up to the farm and saying, rightio, it's my turn, you've had your go, I've been here long enough and it's my turn to have a go. Whereas boomers will see that you've got to wait your time to be able to be in the position where you're ready to do that. Training for boomers only if there's a problem that needs fixing, and Gen Y, for them, it's necessary and expected. Communication at work for boomers is verbal fax typewriters. I would actually say there's a lot of emailing going on for boomers too. Gen Y is a bit more quick, accessible, SMS, audiovisual. Interesting because in the family business that my husband and I work in the farm business, if there's an issue on farm, my husband and my generation will send a video of something, and the feedback we get from the boomers is, I don't even know how to open that video, so don't send me videos. I've touched on this quite a bit already about succession being understanding the perception of each family member. So I'm going to speak quite broadly about different family members and what their perception might be, and it'll be interesting to see whether you feel like any of these broad kind of generalizations fit with yourself or other family members, because we certainly get feedback that they generally do. So the younger generation on farm say that they need clarity and direction about the future. They want to know where they're going. They want to know when they are going to be able to make some decisions, because they want to be in control of their own destiny. They feel that they've got some great ideas and they'd like to try them out. They want to know what the future holds and what they can offer to their partners, spouses. They want to know how they're going to be able to support the family they already have or their future family. They want to know what mum and dad are going to do and how they'll be funded in doing it. I would say that's a big fear for the younger generation on farm, is feeling like they can't understand how the productivity of the business will ever transition to them, because they're not sure what mum and dad's personal finances are to ensure that they can retire. They want to know, will everybody own a share in the farm, or will we have to pay siblings out? I think that is a big fear given what land prices are doing. They want to know who is going to be the boss when dad takes over. So historically, I would say if a number of siblings came home, it was always the expectation that the oldest brother would be the boss. And I think more and more we're finding that the development of skill and inclination to be in that kind of role trumps a birth order or a gender. So that's been a really interesting and rewarding part of the succession process. And when we're assisting families in implementing the actions of their family meeting, that's one thing that we really help them mentor the next generation is, and actually how to run the business and be the boss. And that takes a lot of, when we had the picture of the eagle looking to the water, having the ability to do that will really determine how successful the next generation will be in managing other staff and being the boss of the business. The younger generation on farm are really keen to know what their roles and responsibilities are and will be into the future. The generation off farm see that everybody in the business is so stressed, and they want to know what they can do to help. They want to know what happens as mum and dad's age, and is their future secure. I think off-farm kids really share the perspective that they're worried about how mum and dad are going to fund their future, and will there be any implications on them. I recently worked with another family who there was a son in the business and two off-farm daughters, and one of the daughters is a doctor, and she made the comment, oh, this is great because my brother gets mum and dad when they're in their prime and they're able to help with grandchildren, and then I'll get them when they're old and crusty. So there is a bit of a fear for off-farm kids that that's how they'll end up having to provide care for mum and dad. Off-farm generation want to know, just because they're not working on the farm, will anything be theirs? And they feel entitled to something, and is that how everyone else sees it? And it is a bit of a yucky feeling being the off-farm son or daughter, and knowing that in most cases, or in a lot of cases, mum and dad as farmers' whole asset portfolio comprises farm and farm assets. So how do they feel it's fair for their siblings in the business to want part of what mum and dad have created? In-laws and partners of those on farm. So really important to note that we feel like it's not a holistic process unless in-laws are involved. There's a few elements at play there. So the first is being able to confront the elephant in the room. Obviously, in-laws have had a different family upbringing from their own family of origin. With that comes a certain number of challenges, and then they can really be gifts to the process also. So it's really important that we embrace the partners of our children in this process, because that is who your children are going home to at night and sharing their perspective. So it also creates an opportunity to have an external in the room that can keep the person they're married to, so your children or yourself, keep them responsible for what they're saying. So if, for example, if somebody's not prepared to share their perspective for the fear of hurting other family members, our expectation would be that the in-law says, well, that's not what you said, and it's important that you're honest so that we can progress in the process. So in-laws believe that no one is working as hard or as long hours as their partner. And is that fair? Is the business going to be able to afford to pay out off-farm family members? Can the business afford to provide housing for all? Housing is one of those general, I would say, something that causes a lot of drama in families. Yeah, it's a difficult one to keep everybody happy, and a lot of the time it's, you know, it's an expense that the business hasn't necessarily factored in to be able to pay for, that it potentially has to be able to keep families happy. We are not going to be able to survive on this salary forever. So the notion of sweat equity is really built in there, and it's something that we talk quite a bit about in our process, where you know, the next generation will work often below award, or, you know, for a very modest wage, knowing that they'll have the opportunity to make calls at the top end and be able to derive a higher income when they're owners of the business. So the mentality of the children on farm is often that, well, that's why I'm going to end up with more than my siblings out of the business, because I've done, you know, these hard yards and being paid significantly less than I would have if I worked elsewhere, to ensure that transition is possible and that therefore that family legacy can be adhered to. Is the business going to pay for our children's education? Another big one, particularly for families that live quite remotely. And what happens to me if something happens to my partner? Mums in the family generally want family harmony. They want to be fair to all their children. They'd like to be able to live where they choose to for as long as they'd like. They want to be financially secure and not dependent on the ups and downs of the farm. And they want to be able to spend special time with family, friends and grandchildren, and maybe travel. And it's not uncommon for us to see a big disparity between mums and dads in their future ambitions and how they'd like to see the next generation transitioned in. Dads, we kind of see two, I would just stereotype and say, we see two different types of dads. So this is one, and then I'll talk a little bit about the other. So dads are scared of getting old. They want to keep doing what they're doing until they absolutely can't do it anymore. They know they have to face change and let go, but they want to know how they're going to do it and how they're going to fill their days if they're not working in the farm business. So what am I going to do if I can't work anymore? The farm has been my life's work, my hobby, that's all I've done. My wife wants to do other things and I'm not sure I want to. So as part of our process, and when we're talking about what families actually need to retire, we ask them to identify some that we could try and build into having as a passive income, so that they can live year in, year out, doing all the things they'd like to do, as a credit to them for spending years building the business to what it is and being at the stage where it can actually transition. And mum and dad's ideas about what is a reasonable income for a year in, year out allowance or salary is usually quite different. Often we'll see mums saying, well, realistically, if I'm doing a trip every year, that's about 30,000. I'd like to be able to have that to do every year if I choose to. I want to know that I've got a bit of a kitty to buy nice gifts for grandchildren or my children. I want to be able to support them in educating their kids, for example. And quite often we see from dads, if I can just have my ham and cheese sandwich and my thermos and go out in the paddock and do that every day, I'm a rich man. So it's really different, and working through the differing interests and objectives for the future is a really important part of the process. So Dad says, what's going to happen when I go? I want to know that everyone's going to be happy. And I feel with dads, we do see that, and we also see the dads that say, it's really your problem when I go. So, and I would say that's a lack of succession planning, is when dads aren't prepared to make calls at the face of transition, because they're worried about hurting people's feelings or upsetting people, or that they just know they can't make it fair. So having the confidence to be proactive in making a plan while the time is right is really essential to carrying out legacy. Dads can feel that they're getting older. It doesn't feel good, and having a use by date scares them. So that's one type of dad we see. And the other type of dad we see is the one that I described in the family earlier, where they are just so sick of the operational challenges that they just want it to go tomorrow. And they're really happy to pack their bags often. And others say, look, I just want to keep living in the farmhouse, and I'm happy to poke around and check a boundary fence, but I really don't want to control the business anymore. So that's kind of the end of the presentation from a formal perspective, but I'd be really interested to know, I might just stop sharing so that if anyone does have a question, if you could pop your screen on so I can answer you face to face, or you're welcome to write it in the chat box if that's helpful.
I think. Yeah, sorry, Jess. I think it is quite a small group today. So if people were comfortable with, putting their microphone on and asking Jess a question, by all means do that. Or there's that chat function there. But yeah, so I just wanted to let you all know that.
Sure.
Whichever way you want to ask that question.
In the meantime, I might talk broadly about our process, and sometimes that'll help with generating some questions. So as I mentioned, our process is a whole family process. So it involves children in the business, children out of the business, and all in-laws. We always work with 2 facilitators. The purpose of doing that is skill matching 2 different facilitators. So our facilitators are all contractors to the business with other skill sets and jobs outside of doing this work. So ranging from solicitors to psychologists to business banking background, entrepreneurs and small business owners. We've got one person in our team that employs over 300 people between small businesses. We've got a couple of engineers, so it's pretty broad skill set. So we like to try and match skill set with those who are very technically minded and those who are more advanced in a soft skill area. So being able to extract what we need from people to get the right results. So the other thing is we always like to assign both a male and female facilitator to every family we work with. We feel that just creates like a good environment for families to be able to open up. So we'd start by having an initial call with the entire family, which just outlines our process, gives an opportunity for family members to put faces to names, and also any chance to ask questions from the outset. After that, every family member completes a questionnaire, which is basically asking about their hopes, wishes and dreams and how they see the world through their lens. And then we would have an individual interview with each family member and their spouse. So a couple of hours with each of the children in the family with their spouse, and then half a day with mum and dad, just trying to ascertain perspective on a number of different things. It's really interesting. I find it really interesting, the perspective that the in-law brings in that instance, because it's kind of about, you can see them hoping that their spouse will say everything that they're saying behind closed doors. It's quite an interesting evolution. And it's also interesting when you see children, particularly those in the business, who usually have quite a bit to say, particularly about how things are being run and what transition should look like. and it's apparent that they have never said anything like this to mum and dad. So that's really the value of facilitation, is being able to say things that you've never had the confidence to say to other family members. And after that, we do a full enterprise analysis of the business. So we look at the last 5 years' financials. We have each family that we work with fill out an assets and liabilities table so we can assess the statement of position and ensure that the business is doing everything it can to be able to fulfill what it needs to in the future. So as I mentioned with retirement planning, historically, a lot of the families, probably even prior to our time of being in this field, used to pay a wage to parents from the business, and that's not a preference for a strategy in our process, on the basis that that seems to be the first thing that goes that doesn't get paid if there's certain seasonal impacts or the markets crash or whatever it might be. Parents usually say, oh, look, we've been there, we've seen a drought like this, don't pay us this year. We'll just have a really conservative year. And from our perspective, that's really unjust put into having the business at this point. So we do a pretty thorough analysis of the business, and then by that time we have a really good picture on the perspective of everybody and the business performance itself. And after that time, we have all family members in the room together for 2 days. So the first day is quite educational, and we run through a presentation, making some both broad and generalised assumptions about where the family's up to. We also run the whole family through what's called DISC personality profiling, and the purpose of that is really for each individual to understand their own type and preferences a bit better. But also, we always say that at the end of day one, if you can learn a bit more about yourself and a bit more about every person in the room, then it's been a successful day. So we do the DISC profiling, and then the second half of day one is individual questioning of each family member. Again, that's really to help flesh out each person's perspective on a certain number of things. So understanding their perspective on how things are going operationally, what the transition of management, leadership and ownership might look like, how they that night, so as to avoid any conflict. Usually family members will hear something that kind of stews a little bit, and then the start of day two, we have the family members ask for clarification. We set the agenda, so the facilitators working with
You're just breaking up quite a bit there, Jess.
some strategy. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we just probably the last 20 odd seconds we were a bit hit and miss.
Okay, well, I'll try again. I'll have a guess of where we were up to. Basically, the facilitators working with the family set the agenda for day two, so that we can ensure that at a high level, there's been discussion on and a high level strategy created on a certain number of things. What we really like to see a strategy on is mum and dad's retirement, mum and dad being at the top of the tree. So that includes where mum and dad would choose to live in the short, medium and long term, how we would fund mum and dad's retirement, making sure there's provision for aged care when and if that's required, and then helping mum and dad to kind of formulate a bit of a picture about how they're going to spend their days, because sometimes I think that can be a really big blockage in engaging in succession, is the fear of not knowing how you're going to spend your days. So helping mum and dad to find some direction in that path is really important. Then we talk about business transition itself. So in some families we go as, depending on how long the next generation have been home in the business, but quite often we'll draw up a table with all of the operational tasks and make sure they're assigned to somebody from the next generation, and figure out where the gaps in knowledge are at that point. So what training has to occur so that the next gen are able to run the business as adequately or even better in some instances than the generation prior to them. And then we talk quite a bit about opportunities for children out of the business. So I mentioned before that it's important to find a way to make a meaningful contribution to the next generation. I feel like it's catastrophic just to be given a sum of money with no direction on how to spend it, because it's not an apple that you can keep coming back and having more bites from. It's usually that there's a set amount based on what capacity the business has to do that for the next generation. So yeah, that's a big part of our process, is figuring out what is meaningful. And then at a high level, we talk about if superannuation is the mechanism to deliver an income for mum and dad, we talk about how to develop the super to the level it needs to be able to do that. So, for example, if a family have $3 million invested in super, we would conservatively say that would deliver about $150,000 income year in, year out. So creating some strategies to make sure that's where it's at is important. There are obviously other ways to derive passive income streams for the next generation. That's just a really common one, the superannuation. And then we would talk at a very high level about the estate plan. So that's really, it is discussed in quite a bit of detail through the whole process, but getting parents and children alike to have an understanding about how things will transition at an estate event. That's, I would say, the only problem with estate planning is when it's not well communicated with the next generation, and that can lead to all sorts of things such as intestacy claims and create a lot of tension for the next generation. So however you choose, that would be my advice for today. However you choose to do your estate plan, just ensure that it's very well communicated with the next generation. And we always ask families to give a number ranking for how they're feeling coming into day 2 and walking out of day 2. And that gives a bit of an indication about, I guess, how likely they are to implement the actions from the family process. And at the very end of all of that, we issue a report with an action list of items for the family to implement and an in-principle agreement which outlines what the family landed on in terms of their comfort around how to actually action their succession plan moving forward. A subsidiary process that we offer assistance in is helping families to project manage delivering the actions of their action list. So some families do that really well without assistance, but most families we work with need assistance both in a communication space and a technical space in working with their other professionals. So our role in that process would be to communicate with lawyers, solicitors and financial advisors and whoever else is involved at that point, so that what's paramount is the in principle kind of acknowledgements from the whole family, because sometimes I think you might say, oh, I want to sell this part of the business or this percentage of the business to my children who are in the business, and the accountant might say, well, that doesn't make sense from a tax perspective, or the more tax effective way we would do this would be this, but that doesn't necessarily align with the family values. So I feel like having some project management there is really important for families to ensure they're getting what they thought they wanted in the initial succession process. So it is a very holistic process. There's very few gaps because we do get to know everybody really well, and they hopefully have developed a strong level of rapport with us so that they are comfortable to share what's important to them and to see it illustrated with their whole family in a whole family meeting setting. So that's our process quite broadly. It takes a lot of heavy lifting, without a doubt. Any questions?
Like I said, feel free just to unmute if you want to ask a question to anyone.
Or you're welcome to write in the chat if that's easier.
I'm really impressed with the holistic approach, Jess, that you guys take, Proactive take, and like you sort of said at the end, then it's also taking that just the family's plan that they've decided on, really taking it forward and working with them to make sure that it does sort of come to fruition. I think that's a really important part of the process. You know, it's very easy. We've all come across them, these amazing plans and strategies, and they end up just sitting on a shelf somewhere and it doesn't go any further than that. So yeah, and the techniques that you use, that they just seem to be, you know, very thorough, very holistic and inclusive. So you know, like a fantastic program, and a real congratulations to Proactive and all your team. And it sounds like a solid package, you know, an assistance for landowners if they're needing it.
Yeah, it really is, Jenny. And the reason all of our, well, probably the primary reason all of our facilitators are drawn to working in this team is on the basis that they've worked in another workplace that hasn't approached succession from a holistic perspective, which I guess, you know, you can see the gaps when you've seen somebody do it differently in any industry. So just understanding where the gaps are really draws people to engaging in a holistic process. And I would just comment that it is really hard to see the gaps.
Oh, you just cut out again, Jess.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep. just as you were talking about gaps, you dropped out.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So I would just comment that, you know, for example, a lot of accountants are involved in a succession process for the actual physicality of the transition of the business, and sometimes the land. They're involved in that process, but usually an accountant won't have those who are not privy to business in the conversation about succession, which obviously creates a big gap there.
I think Harry, Harry, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, please. Thanks, Jenny.
No worries.
I'll just turn my camera on. I don't know if.
Yep. See how we go.
Yep. Thank you very much, Jess. That was great, and I really could easily identify the different characters from my own family from your presentation, and myself as well in there. We've been, in my family, I've got two brothers. We've been having a lot of conversations about succession. We're all in our 30s now, but we haven't managed to bite the bullet yet and get professional help, which is, I think, what we need. So I'm really interested to hear about your business. And I've just was wondering about face-to-face versus like online communications within the process, because we've sort of decided we would prefer as much face-to-face contact as possible with the process, because it's so important to us. I'm just wondering what the options you guys offer are, because I guess you're a long way away.
Yeah, good point. Harry, where are you located?
Near Canberra.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm in Hartland, so not too far. Only an hour from you, but a lot of our team is scattered through New South Wales and a lot quite close to Canberra. So generally our process is that we would have that initial call that I spoke about, which is about 45 minutes to an hour over Zoom, and then there's an option for everything else to be in person. There is an expense differential depending on how much you do in person. So
of course, yeah.
So, but the 2-day meeting that I spoke about is always in person.
Yeah.
That would be a detriment to the family because it's so hard to read people over a screen, as I'm sure you understand. So I will just offer to everybody, and I have Mary and Jenny have kindly offered to circulate my details, and you're welcome to call anytime. There's no charge to make an inquiry or find out a little bit more about our process. And sometimes I think it's helpful to ask other family members to be involved in that also. So very welcome to contact me anytime.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
I'll think of some more things to ask you, but
yeah, great.
Let's have a go for a moment.
Yeah, great. That's great. Thank you so much. I can also see a message in the chat, I think.
We've just had a few people sort of need to leave, and obviously they're very grateful and thank you. But I think, like you said, we'll circulate your details. So if there's people online that obviously don't want to ask their questions publicly like this, we'll definitely make sure that they've got your details and then they can do it, and with some follow-up phone calls and conversations. And as Jess and I were sort of talking a little bit before the webinar, there's an opportunity for us to do perhaps a bit of a masterclass in the next 12 months with Jess and Proactive. So we'll keep you all informed about what happens there. But of course, by all means, in the meantime, you know, if you feel like you want to contact Jess, you definitely do that. That would be the best thing for you to do. Well, I don't know if there's any more questions. So, Harry, if you did want to ask another one, you could go for it.
Oh yeah. No, I just was wondering whether you've worked with families or individuals much who've been through holistic management courses and sort of yeah, because
which holistic management course have you done, Harry?
I've done a few, but I've done a diploma with Brian Welberg through TAFE New South Wales.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have. Honestly, we've worked with over 350 Australian families, so you probably couldn't throw a scenario at us we haven't seen, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And I do think it's really difficult, obviously, to get across in an hour, but communication and business viability are pretty level pegged in our process. It's pretty important that what's important to you in business is prevalent in our process, to adhering to it and making sure it transitions how you hope it will. And also sometimes mum and dad aren't necessarily as interested in that side of it as making sure it's all very smooth. So if the next generation has an inclination to engage in some kind of, for example, holistic management, that would be something that was really important in the plan, in rolling the plan out, because that's essentially who's going to be carrying the business forward into the future.
Yeah, no, I was just sort of, wondering really. Yeah, thank you. That's good.
No problem. No worries.
Thanks, Harry. That's great. Great that you were online today. Well, we're pretty much 12 o'clock. If anyone's got any questions, let us know, but I don't think so. So I just want to say again, a massive thanks to Jess for her time this morning, and all the work that Proactive does for our agricultural community. And also I'll just plug the Australia Government Future Drought Fund Farm Business Program and the ACT Government. Again, without their funding and support, these sorts of events and any sort of future events is not possible. So we're very grateful and thankful, and there's a survey in the chat, but we might send it out as an email as well, and with Jess's details and the recording. So again, just thank you so much to Jess. Thank you so much to everyone. I think the sun's finally come out here in Canberra, so it might be a time for us to all go out for a walk around the paddock and soak up some sunshine. But thank you very much, Jess. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, and Harry specifically, thank you for your questions, because it really makes a presentation so much more alive for people when there's questions asked and it's interactive. So thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.